Hello and welcome to the final broadcast in the current Imagine Live series from Ericsson, where we take a close look at the future of limitless connectivity and invite you to share your thoughts live. Over the coming years, extended reality, or XR, is expected to transform the communication industry with an estimated 1 billion devices in use by 2030. But will our work soon be empowered and enhanced by this exciting technology? Will we experience retail and sport and entertainment in a totally new way? To help me describe the future, I have two industry experts. I would like to welcome first Josh Beatty. Josh is the founder and CEO of Around, which is a company focused on bringing people together through AR attractions for live events. Around was the winner of the Stagwell Inc.'s annual innovation competition, which facilitates and scales new product ideas within the agency network of 10,000 plus employees. Josh, you are in San Francisco, foggy San Francisco today. Welcome. Thank you for having Hotel Coffee and joining us at this early hour. How are you doing?
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. I look forward to finding out more about what it is that you have been creating. We're also joined by Michael Bjorn, a friend of the series. Michael is the head of research agenda and quality at Ericsson Consumer and Industry Lab and a research fellow ICT market foresight at Ericsson Research. Michael, welcome today. How are you in the afternoon? I believe it is in Sweden.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I'm fine. It's a bit cold here, actually, so it's great to be talking to San Francisco. I can dream about your climate for a while.
This is what I absolutely love about this broadcast, is that we do end up spanning all kinds of time zones. So thank you both for joining us. And also thank you already. People are joining in from Rome and from India, from Pakistan, from London, New York, Peru, Ethiopia, Senegal. We've got a very international crew who are watching. How it's going to work is this. We are broadcasting live on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And throughout the broadcast, the next 45 or so minutes, I'm looking forward to hearing your question. Now, I have my own, so I get to ask a few of them. But I will be taking your questions throughout the broadcast. So please do ask on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on Twitter. So I want to kick off. And I want to kick off with a basic question, but I think a useful one. Josh, what is the difference between AR and XR, and how do they fit into the wider internet?
That's an interesting question. So I think that let's start with the internet. The promise was to really be our town square where people could come together. And what we found is people were showing up anonymously. And the loudest voices, most divisive voices were the ones being heard. I think the other issue that we found with the internet is that it's really self-focused. The person is the product. And, when people turn inward, it's our belief that society starts to turn against itself. And the promise with VR and AR is that it starts to connect us to the world around us. What VR does is it actually separates us from the existing world, and it tries to bring a new, fully virtual world to you. And that's great, but again, you still struggle with anonymity. You still struggle with you being the sole focus. AR is different. It's really meant to connect to the world around you. Up until today, though, AR has really focused on the individual still. It's our belief that when you focus on the outside camera, you can actually start to connect with the world around you in much more meaningful ways. And really, that's what our belief is, that augmented reality is really the next paradigm, because it really starts to bring content to context in a much more meaningful and valuable way.
I think the word augmented is very important. It's not alternate, it's augmented. You're adding a layer on top of that reality. And I want to get a flavor of how you have helped that to look. Let's run our video. That is so exciting. Like, I just love the idea. I love the ability to be playful in the world while also being in the world. And as you say, Josh, this idea of the sociability aspect of it, the possibilities are enormous. Michael, I want to turn to you and find out from your perspective, what are some of the most interesting examples of what's happening right now?
Well, I think we just saw an interesting example right there. And so what we have been doing is that we have this 5G startup program where we invite interesting startups to sort of help stimulate the discussion with 5G operators in order to sort of drive more sort of debate on what can we use 5G for in this realm. And interestingly, even though XR, AR, VR hasn't been the sort of focus for the 5G startup program, more than 55% of the startup, or more than 55, I think, of them, so more than half of them are actually in the XR space. So that tells a little bit about there's a lot of interest in this field and a lot of companies now trying to take the lead. And of course, some of those are kind of still meta or VR oriented, whereas I think we're moving more and more to AR. And you said that augmented is an important part of that concept, but I think actually reality is the most important part. So we're not replacing reality. We're actually going back into reality, into the physical world. And oh yes, of course, we're augmenting that with some experiences then. But it's really about our own reality. That's what we're focusing on here.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how technologies of the future will augment not just our sight and our sound, but also some of the other senses. I want to talk about that a little bit later as we get into some of the more visionary ideas of the future. But Josh, who do you think is really kind of leading in this space right now? And then I'm going to jump over to you, Michael, with the same question.
So let's first, the state of augmented reality is that it's still a novel experience looking for a necessary application. And our belief is that what makes it necessary is when you actually start to connect with the people and the places around you. So what you can do, what Around does, is we can localize everybody within a stadium and then bring them into a shared experience. And that's actually when augmented reality starts to become magical, because not only can you interact, you can actually become part of the story. The stadium becomes a stage, and you really start to take ownership of the content that's being created in a way that is enriching and exciting, and I think really valuable to teams, to brands, and to society in general. So I mean, that's kind of how we see the next phase of augmented reality. It is more spatial computing based. It's not just filter fun, and it is really a means to connect, not just a mode to drive information.
Michael, who's really pushing the boat on this, whether it's AR or indeed XR?
Well, I think if you look right now, if you think about it, so it's actually smartphones. So we shouldn't forget this part. So right now, you mentioned a billion devices by 2030, but we have more than that when it comes to smartphones. And basically all smartphones today have AR capabilities. Of course, various sort of quality maybe, but still, when we just completed a study about 5G users worldwide. So we went to 34 markets globally where 5G is introduced, and we interviewed more than 11,000 5G users. We interviewed a lot of 4G users as well. But what you see there is that actually these early adopters of 5G, so to speak, on a global scale, they are actually very much looking for new applications when they are getting onto 5G. And their usage of XR-related applications is really growing extremely quickly right now. So for example, the sort of stadium usage that we saw on the film clip, that's one big application. But we see other kinds of applications that are also becoming very big. So actually, AR gaming is fairly big. 18% of the 5G users that we interviewed actually say that they are using AR games right now. So in one perspective, you could say, well, it's not just devices that are on the horizon. It's what we have right now, and it's also, of course, the application developers that are now, as we heard a little bit, trying out new ways to deploy AR in new contexts and so on. I think that's where a lot of the creativity and actually the lead is. Of course, then going forward, we need to think about, what's the next generation and what will be the new types of devices and so on. Of course, a company like Qualcomm, they have now recently released an AR specific chipset. So that's also quite an interesting. They've done VR chipsets before, but now they're also doing AR chipsets. So of course, there are many parts of this, let's say, ecosystem, from devices to services to distribution and networks that need to come together for that to be sort of really sort of a leading concept for people to actually be able to use in a meaningful way.
I've got a question here from David Bradley in London, and Josh, this extends what Michael is saying. He's asking, what are the industries that XR will benefit from the most? We've had some examples of who's benefiting right now, but in the future, who are you imagining how it's going to roll out? Are there any use cases, Dave is asking? Are there any use cases that you can share?
For us, we see sports, entertainment, any place that there's an audience and that there's fan engagement. Because we think that shared AR is really the thing that pivots augmented reality into really a medium and content space of its own. If people say retail, I think that these extended reality, you need safe space for these things to work well. They don't work well and crowded. They don't work well when things are kind of forced upon you. I think that we're really at a time where people don't want additional layers. They want more edited experiences. And so it will be a balance. And it also is really dependent on the audience itself. We know that young audiences, they're already in this space. Older audiences are going to need a much more specific reason to find value there.
I want to talk about those audiences in a second, but the most important thing is actually getting those audiences on board. And there are many barriers to entry, I'm imagining, for any new technology, but this one in particular. Josh, what are some of those barriers to entry, and how is the industry trying to overcome what technology unfortunately has done in the past, which is just simply recreate a lot of the different strata of influence?
The biggest barriers is first consumer behavior, just because all of this extended reality is a new means to operate, and that requires people to change what they're doing. And that is actually the hardest thing to do. I think another barrier is always going to be the smartphone. The ability to one up that, which is I think what Meta's trying to do, it's not going to happen. First, any extended reality tool is going to extend from the smartphone itself. And so, for a lot of innovators in this space, they are going to be strapped to that phone, whether they like it or not. I think beyond that, VR is a false promise in the sense that, we all want it to be a place where we can move around. It can act as a memory palace, but our brain doesn't work that way. It's really good for experiences that come at you, but it doesn't allow you to explore in the way that we hope. At least not now, but maybe not ever. So I think that it's expectations. I think that it's behavior. And how do you break through that? You kind of need a rocket ship or a meteor impact to break free.
Michael, are there also geographic barriers associated with this? What does XR mean in rural Peru or in sub-Saharan Africa?
Yes, there are geographic barriers for sure, but I'm not so sure. I think that consumer behavior is necessarily just a barrier. So I think, first of all, when we looked into this, what we're seeing, just actually like with the smartphone, when you adopt a new platform, you actually move over your behaviors onto that platform. So maybe we shouldn't focus so much on what are the new behaviors, but actually what are the behaviors that people have today that they can do in a simpler and or more sort of fulfilling way for them. So I think we are seeing, of course, then games, sports and entertainment as one area, shopping as another big area. And actually, I would say specifically in Asia, we've seen a lot of interest in AR-related shopping applications. And it doesn't mean that you have to go out into a crowded area or something like that. Maybe you are actually fairly isolated when you're doing online shopping, but you still would like to have the opportunity to watch something in a more sort of realistic way before you decide on a purchase, or maybe just turn it around in space and see it from all angles and stuff like that. So that's another area. Social communication is, I think, the one that's going to drive this out into the crowded areas eventually, actually, because I think we need to have this sort of human connection, but actually with this sort of digital augmentation on top, maybe going forward. And also, I think if you look at the fourth area we normally talk about, which you could call maybe virtualized work or something, it started very much, I think, in the VR space, but we also see that VR has certain limitations. It is a bit sort of claustrophobic to have this thing that covers your eyes and you can't see what's happening around you. So moving that into AR is also very interesting. And I think that's an area where, if we think about global geographies and so on, it opens up for more work presence, even though you're a remote working person. That could be inside of a country, but it could also be across continents and so on. So I think that's another opportunity area to look into. Again, I don't think we are talking about new behaviors initially. It's taking what we're doing right now on a flat screen interface and making it a bit better, a bit more a feeling of actually meeting the three of us right now, having this remote presence, stuff like that. And once we get used to that kind of idea, then maybe we can gradually change our behaviors as well. So I think actually behavior is an opportunity rather than a barrier.
I'd like to add one other aspect of VR that doesn't work for everybody. There's been a lot of research about how women in particular struggle with motion sickness when it comes to VR. And that's a barrier to entry if we want to, for example, use VR headsets in environments outside of entertainment or gaming, even in work. That's an enormous barrier to entry. I say that as somebody who experiences
and that's a motion AR actually.
Using a VR headset. Yeah.
When you get into AR, it's different. And actually, just as a sort of side note there, we did actually a global study where we asked about motion sickness or car sickness, so motion sickness in cars. And actually 20% of people said that they are at some point motions or car sick or feel car sickness. So this is not a new thing. We're not going to, yes. So this is a global phenomenon for other technologies as well, I would say.
Absolutely. Well, there is a question here. You mentioned something, Michael, about the workplace, and as we're talking about, how this technology is going to be, used and advanced in the future. There's a question here from Jason Cooper on LinkedIn, who draws on this idea of the hybrid workplace and throws it forward a little bit. Josh, I'm gonna ask you this one. Will digital twins be the evolution of hybrid working? Will XR and AR have a big part to play in the future of work and how we conduct business? Michael has suggested a couple of ways, proposed that this is actually going to be something interesting and something that's useful. How? What types of things will we see in a hybrid work environment using these technologies?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that, it is really hard to beat a lot of the tools that we currently have right now. I mean, video is important. It's always going to have its place. I apologize. I'm notifying myself. In the workplace, I don't know. I mean, I challenge that. That's, Michael was talking about that things that are more simple, that can be more efficient, that's what's going to win the day.
Yeah. Michael, do you have any?
Can I give an example?
Thoughts? Yes, please.
Yeah, so thinking about XR, digital twins, I think is slightly different. So maybe we could talk about that, but I'd focus on XR. So just one example, during the pandemic, during the lockdown, sort of phase there. We in my work group, we all had VR headsets, and we had meetings. We tried to work in VR to see as an alternative to Teams and other tools, and not all the time, but sort of doing both. And since we couldn't do research on other people during the pandemic, we decided to do research on ourselves instead, just to have some sort of idea about what we were doing. And actually the interesting thing was that people said that socially this was a big plus for them, so they felt that they actually met people, which they don't do on these flat screens meetings, and they said that they could feel eye contact with people. Now, we didn't have eye tracking devices, but the simulation was good enough so people actually experienced that they were looking into each other's eyes, and they also said that the body language was got better, and things like spatial sound make them sort of not talk in each other's mouth all the time, as you can do easily if you have a big video meeting, but you actually can sort of localize who's talking, who's going to say something, and it becomes more natural. So there were lots of these things that had the social dimension of work becoming much more fulfilling for people. And also actually people saying stuff like, I could move around a little bit in a limited space, but still it meant I got up off my work chair. I didn't sit in front of my computer all the time. I got sort of the blood going in my body, and it was good for my health as well. So I think there are actually many merits already we can see now, even though I still think that VR itself is going to be too limiting for people. We need to move into AR in that space as well.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it, Josh, that we do need to meet people where they are. Your innovations, for example, the stadium is a great example of creating a platform that exists already that you are using to augment a space where people already are and are already expecting phenomenon, right? They're already expecting excitement and thrills and to engage as well. Mohammed Sabir on Twitter says, well, what measures, though, are on place when it comes to addressing security concerns within XR? What are some of the security risks that you've had to tackle when you're dealing with this type of thing in large crowds, and with other applications that you've developed?
I love that question. We're really focused on the privacy and the security. Sorry, it looks like my video feed might have dropped out. With us, it is about making sure that people are very aware of the data that we're capturing and how we're sharing it. So we try to put all of that into the user's hands, so they are the ones that are able to decide it. We do not want to make people the product of AR. We want them to really be the ones that are in control of this space, and it's really a multi-sensory experience that they should feel comfortable and safe in, and not feel that everything is being harvested.
And Michael, how are you at Ericsson thinking about the safety concerns and implementing security protocols as we are advancing into this space?
Well, I think overall, so 5G has a lot of focus on security. So there's a lot of work going on there on the 5G level, of course. But I would like to add one more angle to this that we haven't maybe overall in the industry focused enough on until now, and it's the fact that once we when we start using more and more sensors, it's on these devices to sort of place things in the physical world and so on. It also means, of course, that we are capturing our surroundings with these sensors, and it can be good because if you capture your surroundings, it's easier to place these digital objects into the physical world. But at the same time, you may be actually capturing other people who are not really interested in being sort of on camera, if you see what I mean. Maybe it's not a camera, maybe it's another sensor. But so when we think about security, we think about the user and user privacy maybe, but we need to think about bystanders as well. So maybe I'm not really sort of happy that you are looking at me with your sensor-based device, and of course this was a problem already when Google Glass launched back in the day. So I think this is an area that needs to be further thought through, actually. And we're working on that.
I was actually going to ask.
But yeah.
I was actually going to ask, innovations often they often follow similar trajectories when it comes to how technology is rolled out, who adopts it, and the best ways to really ensure that something is a success. This is a new innovation. This is a new technology. How are you, Josh, looking back at some of the previous communication and entertainment technologies and learning from their sort of peaks and troughs, the best way to put this out into the world? Who are your sort of the first people that you're going to attract? What are the touch points? What are the approaches to killer apps? And by exploring that, how have you learned how AR is different? What are the particular things about AR that make it unique and bring new things to this technological platform that we find ourselves standing on?
Yeah, that's a deep question. So, I first look back to the internet and just knowing that was a really long process in terms of, when it took off, or when it started, when it took off with a small community, and then finally when it hit mainstream, 8-10 years. I think we're about 6 years into this AR ride, and it is gaining steam. I think that what really starts to move it beyond it is the content itself. And thinking about other mediums, the technology and tool is great, but it is the content that really drives the audiences, that drives the experiences, and that drives the value. So I think that what we're looking for in augmented reality is, what is this new order of content? What does it mean? How do people best engage with it? And how does it differentiate from everything else out there? And we're still exploring that. I think that people love that this is a platform of discovery, but we still need to be aware that, the most important thing with video is the director. How are you guiding the attention? How are you progressing the story? All those things are still trying to take shape with augmented reality. And I think once they do, that's really when it starts to move a lot faster and into more areas.
That's a really, really interesting point, that it is a storytelling platform. Are there other uses that you can imagine for this? Either Josh or Michael, are there uses that you can imagine for this outside the storytelling? Or will necessarily everybody from technology companies to healthcare companies to entertainment companies need to bring a storyteller on board in order to create the applications for an AR platform? Josh, I'd love to hear from you about your experience. But Michael, it looks like you've got something to say first.
I was just thinking about this. What's the fundamental difference here? And I think if you think about the smartphone, I think there was one thing that really made the smartphone really successful. Just one. And it was this. So just the fact that you could touch the screen. So this was the first time we had something else than, so maybe you remember a term called GUI, the graphical user interface, the idea that you should have, windows and menus and waste paper baskets and whatnot. These are metaphors that actually you really need to learn. It's not something that comes natural to everyone. And also, by the way, the metaphors are not used in the right way. So a window is on a PC. It's not something you can necessarily see through. So it's not really a window in that sense. So you need to sort of think about. There's a lot of sort of issues with that, but everyone knows how to touch something. With the smartphone, it's still a graphical user interface on the other side. So I think the big promise, the big fundamental change we're looking at now is, will we find one more NUI element that is as powerful as the touch? And by NUI, I mean natural user interface. And I think that's the direction we're going in. And then if that happens,
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? How you see that playing out?
So I think when we talk, if you look into the idea of natural user interfaces, it's sort of the stuff that you learn growing up as a child. So reaching out and touching something that's so natural, you don't have to practice it. You know how to do that. So potentially, maybe with AR, you can actually not just reach out and touch a flat screen, but you can sort of pick up an object somehow and look at it like that. And if you could do that, you can't do it with a smartphone. I'm just saying, if you could, then that would be a hugely powerful advance. And I think that would then be phase adoption across all these different use cases we're talking about. So, of course, there have been attempts. So smart speakers and voice recognition systems, that's an attempt to do a natural user interface. But I don't know about you, but for me, I'm still struggling with talking to they're not natural. You can talk to them, but it's still not like conversation. They're getting better all the time. So maybe that's going to be one that gets there. Who knows? But I think AR and also VR, XR overall, has this promise that, you know, if I can just do things the way I do them without, so the interface disappears. It feels like interacting with the physical world. I pick up a cup like that and I can do the same thing with a digital object. I think that's what could really, that's the promise. And we're not there yet.
And how far away are we, do you think, Josh? Like, what are some of the steps that you're imagining AR is taking as it gets to that promise, that sort of science fiction, speculative fiction? I won't go into it too far into my geekery future, but that kind of future.
I would love to kind of talk about what's next, but I think that there is a lot now in terms of how to move beyond the storytelling of AR into more applications. For around, we launched with the Minnesota Twins in August. We're now at the LA Rams. And we're really understanding how people are engaging in meaningful ways. And it does break down by audience type. What we found is, the tween market, they are net native to the physical digital world, and they are jumping in. They're the ones that download apps. We were able to bring teens and older audiences in through more competitive and collaborative social type interactions. We've now brought on casual fans through life-size players and that type of content that they can connect with in more meaningful ways. And then finally, with a fanatic, we have an ability to bring next-gen stats into the stadium in a way that really allows them to recreate their own broadcast experience. And so I think it is content-based and audience-based in terms of really what is going to drive people into it. Where do I see it going? I think we all know that Apple's going to make a play in this space. It's my belief that their play is going to reside in the living room. They own, that type of content, and it's a safe space. And I think one thing that we learned from Google Glass is that people need a safe space to explore this technology, to become comfortable with it, and then to start to push it out from there. It's not something that people are going to walk down the street, because again, people don't need that distraction. We think that the stadium is another safe space that this type of wearable technology will have a place as well. Because again, you're turning the stadium into a stage. You're able to then connect with everybody else in this space. And to Michael's point, that is actually the new interface that we think exists here, is the social aspect, the ability to interact in a very tangible way, and also in a way that you're not anonymous. It's another person, and that's I think really powerful and a huge draw right now with a lot of people.
What about the technology, Josh? Like, what technology needs to be in place in a stadium environment? Or is it all that it's just held on people's smartphones? Is that the mutual experience? Is that the only technology? Or are there new innovations in technology that perhaps some of the people who are watching today might think, oh, okay, I already know how to do that. Or, oh, okay, this is something that I should be interested in developing my skill set towards because this is on the way and this is coming.
So the localization is a problem that exists. How do we localize in an environment that's ever changing? And there's a couple of different ways at it. There's camera-based, which is really dependent on physical markers. There's 5G-based, which I believe exists, but I haven't been able to, find enough people in a place for it to actually be worthwhile yet. But that is the promise. I mean, once millimeter wave and we have ability to actually localize on a really narrow level, that's when this becomes worldwide and not just pocketed experiences that you have to go find.
That's an exciting prospect, isn't it, Michael? The idea of being able to do something like that. I have a question actually I have a question for you from Sam, actually, Michael, from LinkedIn. Another application that Sam is suggesting job training, knowledge sharing as an emerging market for XR. Do we see Ericsson making use of these applications within the company?
So yes, actually, we are developing our own environments for example, new employees. And as I said, we are already using VR as a work tool. And actually, during the pandemic, for example, I had colleagues that I've never met physically. So that's also, of course, a kind of job training that you do in that way. But we do have programs around that, absolutely. And we see that in a lot of companies across the world. I think the discussion there about localization is extremely interesting, though, and maybe what we will be seeing in the future also is that we need to have devices collaborating. So many devices sort of collecting information about the environment and sharing that information in order to make that localization actually doable. And I think one piece of that puzzle then is actually the network itself. And I think there's a lot of the networks becomes very central, not just for sort of downloading your content, if you put it like that, because now you get into this sort of conversational mode where you actually have to sort of you have maybe more people involved in this, but you also have the environment that needs to be updated and so on. So I think environments like stadiums and so on are also going to be very interesting arenas for that kind of sort of higher capacity network that is probably going to be needed going forward. So that's another aspect of the technology track we're on, I suppose.
And I know, Michael, you're also very interested in immersive technologies like try before you buy experiences. You mentioned that in Asia in particular, the focus is very much on a kind of a B2C experience, a business to customer experience. Liz asks, what are the most popular experiences that are being used by B2B clients?
So I think one of the areas we've seen is actually when you're doing, so for example, if you're doing any kind of product development and so on. So you can do fast prototyping, you can do all kinds of sort of digital prototypes, or you can work on a digital twin. We had this discussion about, or we didn't talk about digital twins, but having digital twins to sort of do all your development work and before you know what you want to put into the physical product or whatever it is. But in that arena, we also have to think about the fact that you have many companies, they have a supplier ecosystem, so a supply chain system that they're involved in. And I think the B2B part there is how do you connect all of these different then so for example, let's say I'm building a physical product and I'm buying a part of you. Will you supply your digital twin to me? Not necessarily, because maybe that's like giving away your trade secrets to me. So how can we make this sort of supply chain work that works physically today but is slow, work in a sort of in an XR kind of world where you're also sort of then trying to make digital design and product development and whatnot, as an example. I think that's a very interesting area, and it needs probably new types of standardization and other kinds of things, not just technology development.
I'm going to round out today with just a very, very quick question for the two of you. And I'm afraid we are limited for time because we've had so much fantastic conversation from the audience. But just in a few words, right, as we are coming up to the holiday season, if you were to ask Santa or whomever else for a gift that would move your dream of AR or XR forward, what would that one thing be that would move the idea of what you're imagining for the future to happen sooner? I'm going to go to Michael first on that one.
So again, I think we talked about this idea of natural user interface, and I think actually just localizing things in space makes them feel more natural. But again, I want to have a gift, and maybe that my watch here becomes something that can track my hand for inputs and so on, so that I can actually grab things digitally in front of me, whether it's through a phone or through glasses, I don't mind. But I want to have that next idea, that next sort of thing that makes the user interface happen for me.
And Josh, if there was one or even two innovations that just could magically appear, the things that are interrupting your advancing technologies as you are making them today and as you're imagining them for tomorrow, what would that be?
I mean, it's not so much an innovation. I mean, my wish is that we no longer use the term metaverse, because I think that it is so ambiguous, so driven by one company's own directives that it's really doing our entire industry a disservice. We see this as a medium that extends beyond the limitations of just one place or one company. Augmented reality is something that should be able to be tapped into in many different ways, whether it's phones, headsets, or whether it's remote as well. We really want to see this as a way to create community and extend that community. And I think the metaverse is all about control. So that's my wish.
Excellent. Wow, we've got at least two things to put down on a list. I'd like to thank Michael and Josh and everybody who helped steer our conversation by sending in a question today. As I mentioned earlier, this is the last broadcast for 2022 in our Imagine Live series, and we have had some amazing guests, some fantastic, great questions from our worldwide audience, and covered some fascinating topics. Here is a reminder of some special moments from the series. Hi, and welcome to Imagine Live. Please welcome my two esteemed guests. I am delighted to see Nicholas Hovdorf, Peter Linder, Julia Sanchez, Stephen Moore, Paul Berkner, Dennis Wong, Thomas Davin, Ludwig Langren, Lars Lind, Professor Misha Dohler, Michael Beck, Emily Olander. And today we are reimagining entertainment, cyberspace, ecosystems, the B20, the business 20, to achieve net zero education.
When you look at the world around, we are facing a learning crisis. 70% of children who are 10-year-old in lowest income, middle income setting in the world, in countries in the world, who are in school, so 70% of children who are in school who are 10 can read a text, but they cannot explain to you the text that they read. So we are facing with a genuine crisis, and so we must evolve, we must innovate.
Technology enabling lifelong learning in a very different way. So we're no longer just targeting school children or university students, but we can actually make education available to all of us, leveraging these very same technologies.
And actually have to say it was like a huge success, and the technology worked so well. The sound was perfect. And I would say that visually, actually it kind of added value. The fact that one was sitting on the screen, the other was on the stage in front of the audience. So it was a combination, what was seen on the stage with the images coming from the second location.
Think of a future where you could have actually AI co-create with you, right? Co-compose, co-act with you. You have something completely new instruments being created. And Hans Zimmer's just started looking into this with June. So we're entering now a new era where really we see ourselves as an accelerator. We provide the technology, but we need the legs of Julia, the pioneers, in saying, let's adopt this in a world which has been quite conservative for decades and for centuries and for millennia.
Say you are in charge of a public hospital, and you can see how you can use sort of ambulance drones as a complement to the conventional ambulances. Speaking of the ambulance, you can see how you can sort of connect that one with high-speed connectivity to deliver sort of real-time footage of the emergency and deliver that to the doctors at the hospital.
That's pretty much like playing around with the Legos we did when we were a kid. Perhaps we don't need to go back to the Duplo days when it was just big blocks, but when we were pretty young and tried to put together something like this. So the ecosystem challenges, both the ecosystem were confined and also the things that we were doing. But now when we move to 5G, we're more into these kind of things. And what I mean with this metaphor is essentially as we move into when 5G is starting to become nested with IoT in a number of different industry verticals, We have more options, we have more pieces to play with.
I believe that the future is here and the future is now, and it is just up to us to explore it.
One of them is this milestone moment that we have in 2022 that we'll have 1 billion connections on 5G in 2022. That's massive. It's the fastest moving technology on the planet in terms of the different Gs. And the exciting thing is that we're on the cusp of liberating industries. This is what it's all about. And to do that, we need to build ecosystems. You use this fantastic technology to enable these ecosystems. That's the cusp of where we are now.
I have a question here from Neha Arora A in India. Is it possible to create digital transformation by including people who may or may not have the financial means or the necessary know-how to benefit from digitalization? Hans-Paul, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
The opportunity to really cover the urban areas, the rural areas, with devices to really make sure that people can connect with each other. But I think the key is that connectivity has become very inexpensive, and the opportunity, therefore, to really include everybody has been massive. I mean, we've seen this in India, we have seen this in Africa, Latin America, especially in the emerging markets.
Keeping products in use for longer can have huge benefits. If we look, for example, at the life cycle carbon emissions of a mobile phone, about 80% of those carbon emissions happen before you've even taken the phone out of the box. So, for every extra year that we can keep a mobile phone in use, extending that lifetime, and then, slowing down the rate in which we have to make whole new phones is one aspect of it.
So really keeping the 1.5 degree ambition alive. So what that means for us is we need to halve our value chain emissions by 2030. And it's not about actions later, it's about actions now.
That was an amazing review of 2020, and it reminds me that I need to get some new clothes. But in terms of the content, congratulations to the Ericsson team and everybody for pulling together such an amazing and forward-looking series in 2022. And thank you to you, our audience, for joining us. At the moment, I think we've got about 250,000 people on Twitter and across LinkedIn and Facebook. We're not sure the numbers, but I'm sure we'll find out that our numbers just keep on rising. Please do keep spreading the word about the series, liking our broadcasts. We hope to see you all again in 2023.